Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder looking at some more of the updates 1.75 vehicles. This is the V-156-B1, it is a rank 1 battle rating 1.3 naval/dive bomber that has come to the British tree. Now we have had 4 very similar machines which have been added to the game in this update, the V-156-B1, the V-156F, as you can see here, and then on the American side you have the SB2U2 and the SB2U3. Now I think the way I'm going to do it is I will review these guys by themselves, and then I will couple together the V-156B1 and the V-156F. So this is going to look at the B1 and the F at the same time. Generally the only real difference is the fact that they have slightly different guns, and also this French machine also gets less of a bomb load. It gets 2 50s or 2 100s, whereas the B1 is able to get, let's go to modifications, as you can see, a 500 2 100 pounders, a 500 2 250 pounders, and a 1000 pounder. And also it has 2 more guns in the 7.7 range. So, yeah, basically the F version is a worse version of the B1, so everything I'm going to say about the B1 in this video can be taken for the F, and they're also at the same BR, so if you want to use the F, just understand that it is a worse aircraft than another aircraft in another tree, which is more usable, I suppose would be the way you put it. So first of all, let's have a look at the armor. The armor, we have a steel plate behind the pilot himself, between the pilot and the tail gunner, 9.5mm thick, which is not terrible, and then 3mm, which I'm guessing is the radio, or something of that nature, just because of where it is situated in the vehicle. The offensive 7.7 Browning machine guns, you can find 2 on each wings, 1,000 rounds per gun, meaning that you have 4,000 rounds of offensive 7.7 Browning machine gun, which is incredibly good, to be honest, meaning that soft targets will be wiped off the map when you are done. Technical oil cooling systems, and also the fuel tank, which is supposedly self-sealing, sat behind the pilot. And this is powered by a Pratt & Whitney R15352 14-cylinder radial. Now if we go over to the F variant, which is here, we can just go here, and you will find that it is the exact same engine, and the only things that are different, as I said, are the 2 guns which are here instead of the 4 Brownings, the gun on the back in the turret, and also the bomb loads in its entirety. I have no idea why that's come up. Right, so let's go back to the B-1 version. You get 2 skins with it, and it's kind of annoying that you can't unlock the other skin. This blue skin is okay, but when you see the other skin, you'll realize that for some reason you can't unlock this, you have to buy it, but it looks a hell of a lot better. I much prefer this camouflaged pattern, the bicolor one, instead of just a straight blue or a straight grey skin. So if you like that kind of stuff, I think it's much easier for you to just create your own instead of buying it, but it would be nice if they brought back research stuff, like researching skins instead of just the ones you need in ground forces. So the tail gunner has a 7.7mm Browning machine gun, and also on the bottom you will find yourself with an absolutely massive tail hook, which is here. In actual life, it struggled to take off from British carriers, but it still had the tail hook installed on the machine. It also has this very interesting bombing mechanism, which you can probably see here if we zoom in. Here we go. Very similar to what you find on the Ju-87, where this top bit releases first, and then it kind of has like a swinging catapult motion as it is slowing down. This helps with the dive bombing aspect of this machine. At the same time, the dive brakes were actually taken off the B1 compared to the F, but in-game they are simulated by the flaps, which you'll find here and here, very small, but they will go directly to a landing position when you hit the air brake button. So technically you still have air brakes in this, and they won't rip off. So yeah, simple as that. You do have landing and raise flaps, no combat flaps, but that's completely fine. Looking at the modifications, you start off with an OK bomb load of two 100s and a 500, but that, in my opinion, still means that you should focus on the bombs. The first modification you should get is the offensive 7.7mm belt. This is because the default for the 7.7mm is not very good. A ball API I APT, whereas if you use the tracer belt of IT API, you know you're going to do a lot of damage to ground targets, and at the same time you'll be able to attack planes in a large way. So offensive 7 first, the bombs next, then the flight performance, and then the survivability, then the new 7mm, get the other bombs, and then the engine wings repair, and you can leave the turret to last. If somebody is on your tail in this thing, and you are trying to use the turret to keep yourself alive, it's going to be nigh on impossible to do unless you are facing something like a bomber, which you will be outturning anyway. So yeah, simple as that. Focus on the bombs, the guns, then flight performance, then the bombs again, then everything else. Simple as. I don't know if I can say it any other way. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at the history of this specific aircraft, the B1, and then when we talk about the other ones, the American machines, in the form of the SB2U2 and the SB2U3, or at least I should say the ones in the American tree at this point, we'll talk about a little about the V-156 and also about them. So yeah, that's how we'll do it. So here's the historical section, and then we'll get on to some gameplay stuff. So the V-156-B1 has kind of an interesting story behind it, and it links very much into the French version that we have in game. So on the 28th of March in 1940, the French government placed an order for an additional 50 V-156Fs, which is the ones we have in game in the French tree, and the delivery was supposed to begin during the early part of 1941, but due to the production of the SB2U3 for the Marine Corps, it became necessary for Vought to subcontract many of the V-156Fs to sub-assemblies. And as a result of the delay because of this, the second production batch of the V-156Fs, it wasn't ready for delivery before France actually fell to the Germans. And therefore the contract itself, it was taken over by the British, and the V-156Fs were being redesignated to the V-156-B1. So this started as a French aircraft, and pretty much the delivery was taken over by the British when the French fell to the Germans. And there was a few changes made because of this. To meet British requirements, the throttle arrangement was returned to the original design of the aircraft, which meant forward to increase power, so they'd actually inverted it for the French. The Vought bomb displacement gear was also reinstalled, and larger fuel tanks of the SB2U3 were incorporated, and the armor protection for the crew and fuel tanks was also provided. The forward-firing armament was increased to 4 wing-mounted 30 caliber machine guns instead of the single gun which is on the SB2U2, and the fence-type wing dive brakes were taken away from the aircraft, and installation of a British tailhook was also thought about, whether, maybe it could be used for naval stuff, but it isn't known if this actually occurred, like they actually tried putting some tailhooks on or not. So then, this is believed because of this, the V-156-B1 retained the US Navy tailhook, so probably they never changed over to the British one. It feels like it would be kind of a waste of time if they decided to. But the nickname for the V-156-B1 was the Chesapeake, and it was in the British service. It was assigned the serial number AL908 to AL957. So that's, if you're looking at historic records, that's where you will find these machines. if you notice Chesapeake, if you've ever watched Hannibal, you may have heard it before. When I first read the nickname, I was thinking, where have I heard that before? And yeah, of course, the Chesapeake Ripper out of Hannibal. So, I don't know, it's just one of those weird coincidences where a TV show crosses over with a real-life thing. I don't know why, it's just so interesting to me. So the first Chesapeake actually flew on the 26th of February 1941, and by the end of March that year, the British accepted the V-156-B1 into service. In spite of the fact that the poor performance of the aircraft in areas for carrier operations, some of the British officials considered using the aircraft as more of a defensive weapon for seaborne operations from escort carriers. And then tests that they did soon revealed that the added weight of the fuel, armor, and armament made the takeoff run about 1,700 feet, which is obviously way too long for carrier operations from some of the British aircraft carriers. So despite this, the shipments of the new aircraft to England began during the summer of 1941. So even though they tested it and it didn't work for its intended purpose, they still wanted them, or at least they wanted the order of 50, which the French couldn't take, which is kind of interesting. The first aircraft of this batch of aircraft that the British were going to use arrived in Liverpool, and they were trucked to the aircraft repair depot at Burtonwood. They were put together and tested. The aircraft were assigned to various fleet air arms. So the first unit to receive the Chesapeakes was Squadron 778, and they conducted tests on the aircraft beginning June 1941. So the unit itself was actually stationed at RNAS Arbroath and operated as a service trials unit, with one or two assigned aircraft for short periods of time until December 1941. Then in late June, Squadron 786 also received a few V-156-B1s for testing and evaluation during July, and the Squadron 811, based at RNAS Lyon-Solent, was the only squadron to receive enough Chesapeakes for actual operational service. The squadron received a total of 14 aircraft during July of 1941, and the aircraft remained on duty for only 5 months and was actually replaced by the Fairey Swordfish aircraft in November. You know you've made a bad decision when you get replaced by the Fairey Swordfish, I'll just say that. Or at least the Fairey Swordfish is better at your job than you are. And then as the war progressed, Squadron 771 at Twat, and Squadron 770 at Crail, Squadron 772 at Macrasanish, I think is how you say that, and Squadron 776 at Speak all used a number of Chesapeakes for target towing duties, so very much similar to the A-35B in that sense. And then during the June of 1942, Squadron 784 was formed, and this unit used a few V-156-B1s for night fighter training. Squadron 77 was based on at Lyon-Solent until October of 1942, then moved on to Drem. And then by August of 1943, the squadron had retired all of the V-156-B1s. And then by May of 1944, the last Chesapeake was withdrawn from Fleet Air Arm, or the FAA service, when Squadron 770 retired their last target towing aircraft. So let's just say these machines didn't enter combat use, mainly because they weren't able to actually perform the role that they were designed to perform, at least in the British sense, and then they were relegated to target towing duties and basically training machines. So very much similar to the fate of the A-35B, if you've ever read about that. A pretty bad aircraft in terms of how it fit into the war, but let's have a look at how it fits in-game. So when I did a review for the D4Y2 and also the D4Y3, I talked about how these aircraft, their actual primary role of dive bomber, naval bomber, doesn't really fit the game, especially in air realistic. What you're looking for in air realistic is either a really good fighter, pretty much a really good energy fighter, even if we narrow it down, and then what you also need is some kind of heavy bomber. Now, at rank 1, in the British tree, you kind of already have these things. The Hampton Mark 1 at 1.7, with its really good bomb loads, is definitely one of those bombers which I would class as a very good one. With 4,000 pounders, you can, do really well. And then, if you look on the really good fighter side, you have a Hurricane. Or, the Hurricane Mark 1 Late, which is one of my favorite aircraft, or the Hurricane Mark 1B, or the Hurricane Mark 2B Trop, and also the Hurricane Mark 4, which are all at the same BR of 2.0, by the way, which is ridiculous. But anyway, going back to the point. This means that the V-156-B1 runs into an issue that you see quite a lot in War Thunder, where it doesn't really have a place in what we would call the meta of the game. Now, what it's good at is taking on one large single target, which doesn't require a massive bomb load, and it's also incredibly good at taking out very light targets with its 4,000 rounds of 7.7mm. Well, at rank 1, there is a lot of soft ground targets, generally vehicles, SPGs in the form of Nashorns, artillery, AA, so in that part, it's got it covered. But when we look at the idea of having one massive target to bomb, but not needing a lot of bombs, just accurate bombs, that is a concept which doesn't exist. And there was something that the Iron Armenian did a video on, talking about this idea of this new game mode, basically, where you have a train which goes across the map and, you have to defend it or attack it. If you want to watch it, please go and look at it. It's one of his most recent videos. But pretty much the idea is to have a central element or central objective which is always on the move, and you have to either take it out or defend it. Well, in a situation like that, the V-156-B1 would be pretty useful, because of its accuracy and its dive bombing capabilities, and also the fact that it would be able to get in and get out at a quite fast pace for rank 1. This thing can dive over 600 kilometers an hour if it feels like it. Yes, it does lock up in the elevator, but as long as you keep it going, and, don't do anything silly, it's not too bad in that regard. But that isn't in the game. That is an idea which may or may not eventually come to the game, but that is not in air realistic battles right now. So what you're left with is a dive bomber, naval bomber, which isn't as good as the medium bomber, which you need to be as good as in order to put a dent in the ticket race. And therefore, what you're left with is a machine which has a few bombs on it, and has 4 7.7mm Brownings, which can take out light vehicles, which can eventually win you the match. The difference is, other fighters can do this role and also be combat effective against a lot of the vehicles that you face, such as the Italians and the Germans at rank 1. I would much prefer to be ground pounding in something like a Hurricane Mark 1/Late than a V-156-B1, because I know when it comes down to the crunch, I can fight that BF-109 in my Hurricane, whereas the V-156, I'm not able to. So even in its designated role, you would still take a fighter over it, because it's better at that role of killing light ground targets. It's a big shame. And therefore, when you think about the V-156, you're like, okay, so it's not great in air realistic, or at least it's passable in air realistic. You can see some of the advantages, such as the guns on it, the amount of ammunition. It has a few bombs, which is nice. Maybe they do something. But then you go, okay, well, this thing makes sense in a ground battle, a ground vehicle battle. It's a quicker, has some bombs on it. It's not going to be as big a target for AA. Maybe it is a bit faster through the air. Maybe the dive does well. You know, you don't need that much defensive armament on it, so yeah, maybe this would be a great idea. Well, at 1.3 for the British, you don't really have a lot of options. You have the Daimler, and you have the A13. And then you have the A13 Reserve, and the Tetrarch Reserve. So you'd have to run something like the Tetrarch, the Daimler AC Mark II, and the A13 in order to use the V-156-B1. If you actually go up to 1.7, which is the T17E2, oh, also the Independent is at 1.3 if you have it, so, you know, throw that into the mix. If you go up to 1.7 for the T17E2, you have to bring into contention the Wirraway, and also the Sunderland and the Hampton. Now, the Hampton, in my opinion, even though it's a larger target and everything I literally said before about it, it still has 4,000 pounds worth of bombs, which can easily take out 4 targets in a rank 1 battle. So, even in that scenario, where the V-156-B1 should be shining over its contemporaries in the tech tree, I would still take the contemporaries, because of their bomb load, because of the maneuverability, and because the V-156 can't defend itself any better than something like a Hampton, and definitely not as well as a Hurricane. Once again, we have another machine in game which doesn't have a place, and this seems to be a common theme with dive bomber and naval bomber, apart from a few exceptions. So hopefully, when ships go into open beta, maybe when we get more of this idea of an enduring confrontation for aerialistic, maybe then these planes come into the fold. But for now, the meta isn't there for it. And for this foreseeable future, it doesn't seem like it's going to be, anytime soon. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.